They took my name on Tithe Day and gave me a number that smelled of ink and oil. I learned to breathe the Emperor's name in time with the hiss of the hive's vents, to steady my hands as the Munitorum clerk pressed a purity seal to a stained slate, and the ecclesiarchal preacher promised salvation for the obedient. Now the troop bay shudders around me, ceramite bulkhead cold through my flak, vox speakers coughing out tin litanies while a servo skull drifts by trailing incense like a slow-burning prayer. The Gellar Field hums, stumbles, and hums again. Ozone stings my tongue. Somewhere above, the navigator whispers to a star map no man should see. Around me, boots thunder and buckle clips bite. The lasgun on my lap is chipped and honest, its charge pack warm under my fingers as I murmur the litany of unjamming. The commissar's bolt pistol gleams in indifferent light, a punctuation that ends cowards. I was told the guard is a wall of flesh between mankind and the howling dark. Walls crack. When the lights flicker and the shadows curl inward, calling me by the name I no longer own, am I a soldier of the Imperium or only a candle to be burned down to smoke? They called it Tithe Day, as if a hymn could soften the bite. We stood beneath the hive-spire while ash drifted down like false snow and the loudhailers spat numbers that replaced our names. Munitorum clerks in gray coats moved like blades through the crowd, stamping slates, collecting teeth records, measuring height with a rod that had more saints etched into it than my hab ever had books. A servo skull drifted past, the wax of purity seals fluttering on its cheek, quill scratching at parchment as it tallied futures into columns. I kept my eyes on the Aquila banner and tried to make my breath match the chant that spilled from the ecclesiarch's vox-augmented throat. The air smelled of oil and incense and fear. When they reached me, the clerk's ink was cold and certain. I answered to a number and felt the old syllables of my life peel away like paint. They marched us to the induction square where the ground was scored by 1,000 boots that were not there anymore. Drill abbots in iron collars paced the lines, their voices metronomes against the stutter of a cogitator that ticked out our first schedule. Wake, pray, run. Learn to strip the lasgun and name its parts as if they were saints. The first time I touched mine, the grip was polished by hands I would never meet. I spoke the rite of activation in a whisper, the words catching in a throat dry from recitation. A tech priest watched with lenses like dull moons and reminded us that each charge pack was a blessing, that the machine spirit of the weapon would answer devotion with function. My fingers found the release and the bolt and the scorched smell of carbon. The world narrowed to simple shapes that promised survival. Night began when the lumen strips dimmed from harsh white to the sick yellow of old teeth. We slept in barracks that hummed with ventilation and the low murmur of men praying into their blankets. The cot's canvas dug into my shoulder blades and made my heartbeat loud in my ears. A commissar walked the aisle like a judge at a hearing, bolt pistol heavy on his hip, cap shadowing eyes that had learned to see only duty. He stopped once, and the silence that fell had texture. I stared at the ceiling and recited the litany of endurance, counting each phrase along the bones of my fingers. Faith felt like weight more than warmth. I carried it because the alternative was to be empty, and emptiness was where the warp finds you. Morning was drills again, a tide that never lowered. We ran until breath became a fire that burned clean. Then we ran more. The drill abbots taught us how to fall and how to rise, how to cross a killing field in bursts that made the body obey when the mind wanted to fold. We learned to fix bayonets by touch and to trust the voice on the vox more than the voice inside. The range smelled of ozone and old smoke. Last discharges cracked like polite thunder, neat red lances biting targets that flapped and bled chalk. My hands stopped shaking only when muscle learned faster than fear. I whispered the litany of unjamming, each line a stepping stone across a dark stream, and I found the other side. They brought in a rusted chimera and let us ride the belly of it, while the engine coughed its Prometheum hymn through cracked grills. The fuselage was etched with prayers to machine spirits that had heard too many petitions and granted only most. The turret gunner wore a saint's charm on a chain and tapped it 3 times before he cycled the weapon. When the hatches blew open, the daylight hit like a bolt round, and the sergeant's orders hauled us forward by the spine. I tasted metal in the wind and realized it was only the taste of the city's breath, a blend of refinery grit and incense from a nearby shrine. We ran a mock assault up a broken stair, learned how to clear a room without thinking of the photos on the shelf. It felt like theft. Duty always does. On the 6th day, they assembled us on the parade ground, and the commissar spoke about fear as if it were a tool to be sharpened. A man down the line forgot his place in the litany and reached for a canteen before the order. The shot was a single punctuation, the bolter coughing authority into the morning air, and the body became a lesson none of us required twice. The priest stepped forward then, his crozius worn smooth where his hand had learned it, and said that mercy was a currency the enemy would counterfeit. I looked at the aquila over the dais and felt my jaw set like armor. This was the price. I nodded. What else was there to do but pay? The hours became a ritual we wore like a second skin. Wake to the klaxon. Fold the blanket to regulation creases. Tie boots while the Vox recites casualty numbers from fronts we cannot imagine. Scrub the barracks until the floor reflects faces I barely recognize as ours. Swallow ration paste that tastes of iron and old almonds while a servitor counts chews. Check charge packs on a cogitator shrine that rewards each correct prayer with a green lumen. We hunted dust as if it were an enemy and trained our hands to move before thought. I found a small strip of parchment in my kit one night, a purity seal printed with a verse about fortitude, glue still tacky. I pressed it to the inside of my breastplate and waited for it to dry. When I lifted my hand away, it stayed. Maybe faith is just that. Orders arrived at dawn like weather. Our regiment designation rolled from the Vox, and the drill abbots handed out embarkation slates stamped with sigils of the Astra Militarum and the Adeptus Administratum, red wax cracked by the press of a cogwheel seal. We filed toward the shuttle pads in a column that seemed to stretch from one horizon to the next. The sky above the hive was the color of burnt metal. Transports rose on screaming thrusters and came down again like tired birds. Tech priests moved among the hulls, their robes whispering, incense swinging, auspex coils reading our fate in heat and stress. We shuffled up a ramp into a hold that smelled of oil, old leather, and men. A servo skull bobbed at the hatchway and captured our faces for some cogitator that would decide rations and coffins. I clutched my laser gun and let the strap bite. It felt good to feel something. The clamps thudded, the deck shivered, the ship spoke in rivet and hymn. Somewhere forward, a navigator read a path only he could see, and the Gellar generators woke with a bass promise I felt more than heard. The lights flickered, steadied. Ozone crept along my tongue. I closed my eyes and pictured the hive like a wound. The Vox counted down to translation. I breathed Emperor's name and waited. Translation into the warp felt like folding a map with my bones still pinned to it. A slow, careful crumple that made the air thin and the ship moan from the rivets up. The deck flexed under my boots as if a sea moved beneath iron. The lumens stuttered to a feverish pulse, and the Gellar generators woke fully with a bass song that filled my teeth and balanced behind my eyes. Incense rolled through the hold in thick breaths from swinging censers, sweet and metallic. The odor of sanctified oils layered over the honest stink of men and machine. I said the prayer I had been taught for crossing, not because I thought it would change the tide, but because I needed to hear my own voice be steady while the world outside unstitched and rewove. Somewhere beyond bulkheads, the navigator opened what should never open and read what no sane mind reads. We pressed our backs to steel and pretended that this was movement and not a bargain. Time lost its edges inside the hold. Nights were only lumen cycles, the strips dimming to a sallow dusk and brightening again to a clinic white that made every scar stand up and every shadow look like a question. The Vox spoke in measured bursts, schedules and blessings braided together, while a cogitator clicked to itself in the corner as if tallying our breaths against rations and hopes. We lashed ourselves to bunks when the grav plating wavered and unlashed when the deck steadied. I learned to sleep in slices and to wake to the smallest change in tone, the way a hive-born learns to read events cough. Men told jokes without laughing. We drank recaf that tasted of copper and comfort and pretended it was enough. The tech priests kept vigil over the Gellar Field like monks watching a fire. We were allowed to see the outside of their sanctum once, a door studded with warning runes and purity seals, a pair of robed figures standing sentinel with mechadendrites coiled like patient serpents. Through a grill, I watched censers swing in a red haze while machine choirs chanted in Binharic, a language that sounded like prayer carved into gears. Servo skulls traced narrow orbits, scattering ash in precise arcs as offerings to the generator's temper. I did not understand their rites, only the intention behind them. Keep the bubble intact, keep the ocean out. A tech acolyte paused, lenses whirring to face us, and touched a bronze cog on his chest. I mirrored the gesture without thinking. Some bridges you cross without seeing the river. We kept our laser guns clean enough to see our faces in the barrels if we were fools. I learned the smell of solvent and the feel of oiled cloth, the quiet pride of a charge pack that clicked into place with no complaint. We carved our numbers into buttstocks, not to claim them, but to be claimed in turn, so that whoever inherited would know the line continued. Letters were written on cheap pulp that took ink like a wound. The Munitorum promised to ship them when they could, and a red stamp promised that a censor had already read our souls. I tried to write to the hab I left behind, and found my hand refusing curves that led back to a name I no longer wore. I wrote to the Emperor instead, and the page took it without judgment. Stories rose once the lights dimmed. A man from a dust world spoke of skies so wide he got dizzy looking up. A manufacturing boy told of gears big as hab blocks and a foreman with a servo arm that never stopped moving even when he slept. We swapped saints' names like charms and traded rumors like rations. The best ones hurt a little. If you say your number out loud 3 times, the warp remembers you. If you look too long at the corner of the hold after lights out, you'll see your mother standing there with the wrong smile. When the grav plates hiccuped one watch and the bulkhead made that sound like a breath, the jokes died. Muster was called. We counted. One bunk strap lay neat across an empty mattress. No one said the man's name. The commissar did not need to. The alarm did not scream that time. It clicked, a hiccup in the Vox, and then the deck tilted the smallest degree, like a nod. The air smelled of brine for a heartbeat, though there was no sea aboard, and the lumen strips went the color of old bone. Something brushed my ear that was not air. I raised my laser gun, though there was nothing to aim at, and 15 other men did the same, muzzles drawing a ragged circle around a nothing that felt crowded. The chaplain's voice arrived like a rope, harsh with grit, spilling the litany of protection over Channel 3 until the syllables hammered through our ribs. Tech priests answered with clattering Binharic, and the Gellar Field's hum swelled into a warble that stretched and then snapped back into a pure note. The brine faded. We were left with sweat and the sense that we had been watched by something that had decided, for now, to wait. We found the chapel 2 decks down, a space carved from cargo with a steel altar and a cracked icon whose paint had been polished by 1,000 thumbs. The priest spoke of the Astronomicon and the Emperor's light like a lighthouse no storm could drown, and the sound of his Crozius tapping the deck kept time with our breathing. I knelt on plating that was warm from bodies and stared at candles that guttered in the drafts from the vents, watching the smoke climb and flatten as if pressed by an unseen hand. Somewhere nearby, muffled by bulkheads and taboo, the astropathic choir sang messages through a tunnel no throat should survive. I pressed my palms together until the seams of my gloves bit and asked for nothing but endurance. The commissar stood at the back, hands folded, as if he too needed to borrow the weight. Once, bored beyond fear, I asked a clerk how losses in transit were recorded. He smiled like old paper and said there was a code for it, a 3-letter mark that fit neatly into a column beside ammunition expenditure and the hours of a generator's burn. Acceptable. That was the word he did not say, printed between lines. I walked away with my number louder in my head and the understanding that the Imperium was too large to mourn anything but outcomes. The price is the price. We pay it in silence so the ledger will balance. Near translation bled through the hull as a change in hymn, pitch climbing like a blade being honed. Orders rolled down the Vox. Harness lines snapped into place, and the grav plates shivered under us like an animal about to bolt. I checked charge packs by touch, kissed the cog of my laser gun, and pressed my helmet seal until it clicked. The chaplain blessed us. The commissar watched us, and bay door lit red. What waited beyond the field? Mud, ash, and the line. Rain met us on the ramp, a soot-black rain that ran in threads off helmets and into the collars of our flak. The sky sat low and heavy like a lid, stained the color of old iron by smoke from manufactoria still burning beyond the ridge. The first step into the mud stole half my boot. The second taught me how to walk with the ground trying to keep me. The air stung like a battery on the tongue. Ozone from lost discharges rode the wind, threaded with the sour sweetness of incense from a shrine someone had nailed to a broken post. I watched a column of guardsmen ahead of us disappear as if swallowed, only the tips of bayonets and the white of eyes marking the path. Vox orders rattled in my ear with the clipped calm of someone very far away. Move to the forward line. Brace for counter-battery. The ramp shuddered up behind us with a hydraulic groan that sounded like regret, and the transport's shadow left me standing under a sky that did not welcome anyone. Trenches chewed the world into lines. Water pooled where duckboards failed, a thin skin over depths that swallowed socks and patience alike. Sandbags slumped like tired shoulders, stamped with the aquila and mottled with mold that smelled of old bread. Razor wire snarled in skeins along the parapet, purity seals pasted to posts in long, faded strips that flapped when the wind remembered them. We learned the music of artillery on that first watch. Basilisks behind us spoke with the deep-throated certainty of old gods, earthshaker rounds sliding across clouds as tidy contrails before the far horizon bloomed into dirty red. Their shells have lift in the sound, a rising note, and then the breath you didn't know you were holding leaves you. Theirs come in like questions from the ground up. The air thins, the hair along your forearms prickles, and then the world coughs soil and you are small beneath it. I pressed my helmet tighter and mapped the differences to stay alive. It felt like cheating fate with a child's trick. Between barrages, the line settled into a rhythm that hid its teeth. We dug and we bailed, passing dented tins hand to hand until the water fell away and the mud glistened like a wound. The cookfire was a coil heater wrapped in a cage, the element glowing a prayerful orange as it warmed ration bricks into something that could be called stew. Prometheum ghosts haunted every breath. A ministorum priest moved along the trench, with a voice carved down to the grain, tapping helms with his crozius and lending us the weight of words older than the rust in the nails. We checked charge packs as if they were charms, wiped optics until our own faces blurred, and slept with the sling of the laser gun looped about an elbow so that waking meant weapon before dream. Letters came on thin paper sealed with wax. The servo skull that delivered them buzzed like a trapped fly and fled as if our want might bite. I read mine in the little shelter of a firing step and felt the lines of my old life like raised scars under glove leather, there and not. Contact came with the ungentle honesty of a siren and the whip snap of laws across rain. Shapes moved in the gray beyond the wire, crouched and uncoiled with a patience that told me they had practiced this approach under other ugly skies. I could see the cut of guard flak at their shoulders and the wrongness of the sigils daubed across it, paint that crawled when I wasn't looking straight at it. The order to fire arrived as a pressure in the air before the vox caught up, and the trench became a line of light. My lasgun thrummed against my cheek in a rhythm I had memorized by heart. The sight settling, the trigger breaking, the crackle of spent charge packs sliding into mud at my knees. I did not think about the faces. I aimed at movement, at muzzle flash, at the suggestion of a head ducking where a head had been. A heavy stubber found our position and began to stitch the lip of the parapet into shreds. Dirt leapt in angry flocks. I counted to 4, rose, fired, ducked, breathed, and did it again. This is what the body is for, to be used. Somewhere to our left, a man made a noise like surprise and folded down as if kneeling to tie a boot. The medici crawled to him on elbows, cloak dragging a wet line, hands already slick with coagulant and prayer. I kept firing until the stubber wound its belt dry and silence fell like a held breath. Then the world filled with other sounds. A Lehman Russ rolled up behind our section, its engine note a grumble you feel in the spine. Track guards clotted with mud, dozer blade painted with kill tallies and chips of saint's bone set like teeth. The turret slewed and the battle cannon spoke. One word in a language of pressure that pressed the rain flat and drove the enemy back into their smoke. To the rear, basilisks pounded a steady pulse, and the air tasted of copper where the earthshakers sheared it. A pair of Valkyries stitched the low cloud with screaming engines, rocket pods hissing their own morning psalms into the tree line. Their tails wore purity seals that snapped like flags. We cheered because the body needs to answer thunder with noise, and because even a doomed man loves spectacle. They came then, the ones from the stories. A squad of Adeptus Astartes crossed the trench at a jog that was our sprint, ceramite scarred and rain beating off their plates like creation could not touch them without permission. Their bolters were an argument that no one won. One paused long enough to look down at us, lenses the cold blue of machine light, a purity seal pasted across his helm like a second oath. He raised 2 fingers in some battlefield code and vaulted the parapet as if stepping over a puddle. I watched them move into the storm and felt something small and hard click into place inside me. Not envy, not even hope. A shape to follow, even if only with my eyes. When they passed out of sight, the trench seemed thinner, like a roof had been lifted, and the rain remembered to be cold again. Far behind the front, slow as a heartbeat, I felt a tighten through the soles of my boots, the ground answering each step with the patience of a world learning to endure. Dusk put a lid on the field and turned the trench into a throat. The commissar walked our line, boots loud, and a man climbed the ladder on a whim that looked like hope. One bolt round ended that lesson, clean, final, and we watched our breaths. Orders found us after midnight. Break trench at first light. Advance into the hive's ribs. I cleaned my lasgun and felt the city waiting, a maze hungry for our stubborn no. The trenches spat us into streets that felt like veins, cutting through the hive's ribs with an ache older than our boots. Ferrocrete rose in walls that sweated with chemical rain, windows dark like dead eyes, balconies hung with laundry that had turned to rags when the grid failed. Our breaths came back to us in echoes, thin and quick, and the wind carried smoke from manufactoria where machine spirits had labored until they were chained by neglect and left to sulk. Vox orders rode the rain in clipped bursts. Advance. Cleanse. Hold. The map on my slate was a cogitator's guess. Corridors turned into tidy lines and colored blocks. The truth somewhere beneath, like rot under paint. We moved because movement was the only language the city understood. A Ministorum priest led our first breach, Crozius tapping the lintel of a hab door that had been painted with saints long ago and was now chipped down to steel. Purity seals wilted along the frame, parchment gone soft with damp, wax smudged by fingers that had pressed hard for luck. We recited the litany of safe passage under our breath until the words became a thread I could follow through the smoke. The Flamer team sanctified the stairwell with promethium, a thin sheet first, then a longer kiss that curled posters from walls and sent painted faces running. Heat licked our cheeks, incense thickened over it in a cloud, the priest's censer tossing sparks. I went first through the ducted dark with my laser gun up and my shoulders tight, boots finding grit and steps and sometimes nothing. Shapes moved where they should not. Echoes lied. We learned to shoot at hands before faces because hands pulled triggers. We learned to stop when the backblast from a crack grenade gusted down a corridor, a breath that carried dust and old prayers. We learned that every door is a verdict, and yours is to say it. The enemy wore guard flak where it fit, workers' overalls where it didn't, helmets repainted in symbols that crawled when you weren't looking. Their laser guns cracked like ours, and their voices were human until they weren't. I shot a man at 20 meters because he had a Vox speed, and I had been taught that officers die first. He folded like a knife closing, and I stepped past him into a room with a child's cot and a shrine made from a ration tin, a plastic saint glued to a lid and ringed with ash. It hurt like shame. I checked the corners and pretended I had not seen it, though I could still feel the heat from the tin on my gloves. A squad mate whispered the litany of aim, choking on the middle line, and I wanted to tell him to stop, to save the words for later. But the city ate language unless you fed it constantly. I let him speak. I let it wash over me so the dark would not get in. We fought up through hab blocks into manufactoria, where the ceilings disappeared into gantry work and the air tasted of rust and old oil. Looms taller than Titan's knees sat silent and scornful, while the floor glittered with broken glass and the guts of servo arms that had stripped themselves to bones when the power went. Tech priests in red moved among the machines like mourners in a procession, mechadendrites tasting wires, voices tuned to coax rather than command. They anointed control panels with oils that smelled of citrus and iron, and a binary cant bled through the Vox as they counted subroutine blessings. One glanced at me, lenses flaring, and gestured toward a cogitator station with a stylus. The screen flickered, spat out allocation tables and supply figures, rations per head, charge packs per hour, acceptable expenditure of bodies per block. Numbers clicked into place with a sound like distant rain. The invoice of faith. Pay here, it said. Pay with this and this and this until the column balances. An inquisitor caught up with us in a stairwell and made the air thinner by standing in it. He was small and neat, boots polished, greatcoat dark as judgment, the rosette at his throat, a sun no one dared look at. A servo skull hovered in his orbit, candle wax dripped along its casing hard as pearls, auspex array humming in a lazy circle. He did not shout. He did not need to. He looked at each of us as if measuring our weight against a scale we could not see, then nodded to our sergeant. Containment, he said, voice soft and smooth as paper. The door we sealed shook while we welded. The knocks were polite at first, then slower, then nothing. The Munitorum clerk who signed the form had ink under his nails and the calm of a man who files grief by metric. I watched him scratch a code into a box and felt the ledger accept lives more easily than a cogitator accepts a password. What is mercy when the arithmetic of survival has no column for it? Rumors are currency when truth travels with a rosette and a veil. In the mess queue, as we cupped soup that tasted of salt and iron and herbs nobody had seen, a man said exterminatus like a prayer he wanted to be brave enough to finish. Someone else said cyclonics, and someone else said virus bombs in a voice too loud for wisdom. We shook our heads because hope wears a shape too, and it looks like the ship you came on taking you away again. That night, a void ship burned in low orbit, a slow, stuttering wound that turned the cloud cover into an ember's glow. The chaplain said it was an engine fire. The tech priest said a machine spirit had been angered. No one said anything about the warp slipping a finger through a crack to check the temperature of our faith. The glow pulsed for hours and then went dark. We went back to counting steps, corners, and breaths between shots, because grand fates make small hands shake and small hands unlearn work. We passed through a precinct house where Adeptus Arbites had made a stand. Carapace armor lay piled like a molted skin, riot shields carved by shrapnel, the Aquila scorched pale on a wall where a flamer's wash had erased names to preserve symbols. A single bolt shell lay unfired on the floor, heavy as a decision. An apothecary in white, an Astartes, alone with his duty, knelt over a fallen brother in a collapsed stairwell 2 levels down, helmet off, lenses dead. I watched him work through the frame of a shattered door, his Narthesium hymn humming while he recovered gene seed with hands that never shook. He glanced up once, not at me, but through me, and returned to a ritual older than our regiment. We guarded the corridor with a respect that felt like silence given a body. When he left, he moved like gravity had remembered him. We scattered without orders to let his shadow pass. Days in a hive do not exist. There is only light, and most of it is dishonest. We ate in corners while last fire stitched the floor above. We warmed hands over a promethium heater and told each other about the past because the future refused to discuss itself. My slate carried new objectives every watch and a notification when a comrade's number became a line on a list. The cogitator did not add exclamation marks. It did not know how. A priest told us faith is a coin you spend without asking its value. I believed him because the evidence was all around us, stamped into the metal and the meat. I counted saints like steps, filled my mouth with their names so I could hold my trigger finger steady, and learned to look at the horizon of a corridor as if it might answer. At dusk, we took the manufactorum's heart, a control room that smelled of dust and incense and the baked-in sin of decades. The machine choir had died long ago. The only song left was the whining breath of a wounded cooling fan. We found a cogitator still awake, its lumen flickering in a steady cadence like a pulse. The tech priest coaxed it open to reveal a list of production quotas, fail-safes crossed out, machine spirits placated with bone and blood when oil ran in short. The heretics had bartered with logic and lost, then bargained with the warp and thought they had won. The forbidden truth sat there like a dull coin. You can trade anything if you write it in the right column, even faith, especially faith. We shut the system down with a prayer and a code, the tech priest's mechadendrite drawing an Aquila in the dust. The silence that followed felt like someone exhaling after a long lie. Recall came in the middle of a word. The vox clicked, the channel cleared, and orders dropped with the weight of a bolt shell. All regiments to extraction points. All assets embark by second bell. The sergeant did not question. No one did. You do not ask a storm why it changes direction. You find your feet and turn with it. We ghosted back through corridors we had named, stepping over brass and glass, sliding past walls we had warmed with our shoulders. The hive seemed to lean after us like a hungry thing. Outside, the rain had changed, colder and full of grit that clinked against armor like tiny teeth. The sky to the west burned with a flat glow that did not have a sun in it. A rumor followed us down the streets like a dog. Verdict. I pulled my cloak tighter and shouldered my laser gun and did not look up. The landing field lay ahead, Vox beacons pulsing, ramps yawning like iron mouths, incense already thick as if the ships themselves needed absolution for taking us. We loaded by number while servitors moved pallets of munitions with blank grace, auto-quills scratching across slates as if they were writing a prayer neither they nor we would ever read. A Munitorum clerk pressed a stamp across my slate with a grunt, wax cracking under the seal, and nodded me along. The commissar paced without speaking. The tech priests sang at the engines until the note aligned with something only they could hear. The sky flickered. Once. Twice. A false dawn rolled across the cloud shelf like a wave. I did not ask what it meant. Some answers come wearing capital letters and the thick smell of burnt ozone. We climbed, the ramp rose, and the hinges spoke. I swallowed, tasted oil and ash and a cold that smelled like distance. Above us, somewhere behind the humming silence of the fleet, a decision had been made in a room with no windows and no saints. We would be told what a guardsman needs to know, when he needs to know it. I sat, strapped, and waited for the verdict to find its shape. Sirens pinned us to the ramp while rain and ash made a paste under our boots, a smear the color of old iron that the ship would carry into the stars like a thumbprint. We filed by number, slate pressed to slate, and the hold swallowed us in heat and breath and the stink of oil that lives inside steel. A servo skull bobbed at the hatch with an auspex eye that blinked like a tired saint. Its quill scratched names into a ledger that would survive longer than any voice in this bay. The Munitorum clerk stamped my slate so hard, the wax cracked and left a ghost of the cog imprint on my glove. He did not look at my face. He did not need to. The ship's clamps kissed the hull with a sound like closing a book, and the deck shivered, and we were part of the machine again. The engines took us up through rain so thick it sounded like gravel thrown against the plates. For a heartbeat, the clouds thinned, and a slit of view showed the horizon swollen with a light that did not belong to any dawn. It flattened the storm into a sheet and turned the underside of the clouds the color of hot bone. Ozone crawled along my tongue, and the hull shook in a slow, patient way, as if the sky itself were clearing its throat. No one spoke. The Vox kept its liturgy of numbers and orders and did not comment on verdicts. We rose until the air forgot us, until the planet was a weight we no longer had to carry, and the glow became a memory that settled like grit behind the eyes. If a prayer can be a silence, that is what we offered. We strapped in by habit, harness cutting over flak in familiar lines, helmets clacking against plating like beads on a rosary. The hold spoke in low voices, breath fogging the air, chaplain's blessing rolling down the rows in a bass that made the bulkheads feel kinder for a moment. The commissar stood with his hands behind his back and the bolt pistol under his coat, a punctuation in search of a sentence. I watched the lights walk from green to red to green again as the gravity remembered and forgot us, and I pressed the heel of my hand against the purity seal inside my breastplate, feeling the dry wax crack under pressure. The Gellar generators throat-cleared once, twice, then found their note. The ship drew in a breath that never ended and stepped sideways into a place where directions are opinions. Warp nights return like an ache you thought you had cured. Time lost its regular teeth and chewed with smooth gums, soft and relentless. The lumens swam through their cycles, and the Vox told us our place when the clocks grew dishonest. I slept in slivers and woke to the sound of someone praying the names of saints in the wrong order and did not correct him. A boy took the bunk below mine, fresh from a world with skies so clean you could see the bones of constellations. He held his laser gun too tight and had wrapped the sling twice around his hand as if the weapon might escape him. I showed him how to unwrap it, how to check the pack by feel, where to place his thumb so the charge indicator would not bite him when it kicked. He thanked me in a voice that tried to be deep and was not yet done growing. Later, when the ship's hum faltered and the air went thin, he reached for the litany and could not find the first line. I said it for him until he remembered and heard the voice coming out of my own mouth, like an echo of a drill abbot. I was not comforted by that. I was steadied. There was a time early on when I thought the guard was a ladder you climbed into legend. You hear the stories in the habs and the manufactoria of banners with names long as prayers and heroes who stopped storms with a word. That is not what this is. We are a machine that eats fear and turns it into duty, that takes hope and hammers it into obedience, that spends lives to buy time until someone stronger spends courage to buy victory. The Munitorum has a code for everything, a neat mark that fits inside a box on a slate and adds up whether you want it to or not. Loss in transit, loss in action, loss without note. There is no box for what it costs to say yes again when the ramp drops. The invoice still balances. The ship offered us an hour in the chapel, a space carved from cargo with a steel altar patterned by the kneecaps of 1,000 guardsmen who had learned to kneel without thinking. The icon of the Emperor had been etched into the bulkhead by a patient hand with a dull knife. Wax had pooled under candles until it built itself into walls that held the wicks upright like little fortresses. A tech priest stood in the corner, holding a censer that bled sweet metal into the air, binary prayers rattling under his breath as if the machine spirits might notice our devotion and file it somewhere important. The priest spoke of the Astronomicon as if it were a lighthouse set in meat and fire, something that could not fail because if it did, the word failure would dissolve. He said the Emperor sees every guardsman. He did not say whether he remembers the names. I pressed my forehead to cold steel and did not ask for survival. I asked that my hands do the right thing when they are needed. Rumors returned, because in the warp stories reveal ribs the way hunger does. The boy from the clean sky had heard our last world would be cleansed, that the verdict came written in fire and glass. An old sergeant said that only happens when corruption is a wound that cannot be stitched, and then he folded his arms and refused to say the word that rides with cult, the one with too many syllables and too much truth. Someone whispered about black ships, about a choir that never sings in joy, about promises kept by never being said out loud. I watched the lines on the commissar's face and learned something new. He did not like rumors because they grow too fast to shoot. He told us the only enemies that matter are the ones we can put a sight on, and then he recited the litany of accuracy with his eyes shut, and I believed his sincerity if not his advice. When the field flinched, it did it in a polite way, with a small cough in the hum and a ripple that ran along the deck like a thought. The air went sharp with brine and copper for half a breath, and every man who had not yet learned to control his throat swallowed hard at the same time. A servo skull drifted too close to the midpoint of the bay, and its incense guttered as if an unseen hand pinched the wick. The chaplain's voice landed like stone in water, heavy and sure, and the ripples flattened. We counted. We were complete. The boy breathed again. We learned that sometimes the thing on the other side of the glass only presses its face against it. Sometimes it taps. Sometimes it keeps its true hands to itself and waits for the arithmetic of chance. We returned to maintenance and recaf, to jokes told without laughter, to the habit of sharpening the edge we will put between ourselves and panic. Orders came with a cleaned consonant edge. Muster for briefing. Prepare for debarkation. The slate showed a planet name I did not know and a theater designation that might as well have been a hymn number. Agri-fields marked in neat green on the map that meant nothing when your boots were in the dirt. Reports spoke of raiders, of Xenos with teeth like plows and eyes like coins, of corruptions that start in prayer and end in teeth. None of it mattered in the way the deck began to feel different underfoot, the way the Gellar hymn shifted down into the key of home. I checked my packs, the little tin of oil, the folded scrap of parchment with a saint's name that had held up through smoke and rain and being pressed against my chest until it learned my heartbeat. I took a spare purity seal from the chaplain's box and pressed it into the boy's palm. The wax warmed against his skin, leaving a faint, greased shine. He nodded without words, which is the best kind of thanks in narrow spaces. Clamps bit air. Gravity returned with a promise, and then with a grip. The hull sang to itself in a voice I am starting to think I will know better than my own, wished were ahead. Tech priests whispered into cogitator mouths, and navigators unhooked their gaze from the abyss. The lumens steadied. The vox cleared its throat and spoke in the accent of our next ground. I tasted dust that was not yet in my lungs, heard wind that the ship's vents could only dream of recreating. We rose from benches into ranks as if pulled by a single coil. The commissar drew his bolt pistol and checked its chamber with a nod. Not because it might have changed, but because some acts are the string that keeps a life from unraveling. The chaplain walked the aisle, touching helms with a crozius scarred by other men's prayers. I joined the line and felt the line join me. I have seen Astartes pass like moving churches, and inquisitors decide rooms with a glance. I have watched an apothecary rescue futures from the dead. I have watched tech priests sing to machines that wept oil and answered. I have held a door shut while hands knocked from the other side until they did not. I have marked my lasgun stock with the names of men who did not come back from the other end of a corridor. None of that is why I will stand when the ramp opens. I will stand because the man next to me will, and because the ledger has no box for a refusal that is not treason but only fear. And because sometimes being a wall does not mean you stop the ocean. It means you shape the wave as it breaks so that something behind you has time to name another day. The ramp will drop soon. I will smell new mud or old dust. I will hear someone's first shot and someone else's last breath disguised as a curse. I will say the Emperor's name and not expect an answer. The boy will check his pack, and I will check mine, and the line will move as if it is a single animal that has learned to step through pain. We will go forward until told to stop. We will stop until told to go forward. If the sky burns again, it will mean we won or we lost, in a way the ledger knows how to present. Somewhere on some desk, my number will slide into a new column, and a quill will leave a trail like a scar. Everywhere there is a man like me with a wax seal inside his armor and a litany stuck in his teeth, already stepping, already saying yes. If you wish to call that misery, I will not argue. If you wish to call it faith, I will not correct you. If you wish to ask whether it matters, I will tell you this. The light reaches as far as there are hands to carry it. I carry. The ramp groans. The air changes. We move.